A king once put armed soldiers around a field of vegetables, not to protect them, to make his own people steal them. It worked. Peasants who had refused to plant the crop for years began sneaking into the field at night and digging them up, because guarded things must be worth having. The vegetable was the potato, and the reason he had to resort to trickery is that Europe genuinely believed it was dangerous. Not unpleasant, dangerous. People thought it caused disease. Some believed it was unfit for Christians because it was not mentioned in the Bible. So here is what I want to understand. How does a plant go from being feared as poison to being force-marketed by a monarch, to feeding an entire continent, to helping kill 1 million people in a single decade? Because all 4 of those things happened to the same vegetable in about 200 years. Welcome back to TokiCast, my friend. If a story like this is your kind of thing, follow along. It means everything to us. Let me take you to where it actually comes from, which is nowhere near Ireland. The potato is South American. It was domesticated in the high Andes, in the region of modern Peru and Bolivia, thousands of years ago, at altitudes where almost nothing else useful will grow. And the Andean version of the potato is not what you are picturing. Farmers there developed an extraordinary range of varieties, in different colors, shapes, and sizes, adapted to different slopes, soils, and altitudes, thousands of them. A single family might plant dozens of distinct types in one field. That was not decoration. That was insurance. If a disease or a frost took one variety, the others in the same field would carry the household through. Hold on to that, because it is the whole story. The Andean farmers also solved the storage problem in a way that still astonishes me. They spread potatoes out on the ground overnight to freeze in the mountain cold, then trod the water out of them in the day under the sun, repeating the cycle until what remained was a hard, light, dried potato that could keep for years. That preserved food helped sustain the Inca state and its armies. There is one more thing about those Andean varieties worth saying, because it explains why the knowledge did not travel with the plant. The farmers who bred them were not writing agricultural textbooks. The knowledge lived in practice and in memory, passed down through families and communities, tied to specific valleys and specific slopes. Which potato for which altitude? Which one survives a cold year? Which one to plant beside another? None of that could be loaded onto a Spanish ship. What crossed the Atlantic was a few tubers in a sack. The plant traveled, the wisdom did not. And Europe, receiving the tubers without the wisdom, had no way of knowing that what it had been handed was a fragment of something much larger and much safer. Then, in the 1500s, Spanish ships carried a handful of varieties back across the Atlantic, and Europe recoiled. The plant belonged to the nightshade family, and Europeans knew that family produced some genuinely poisonous plants. The leaves and stems of a potato are in fact toxic, so the suspicion was not baseless. It grew underground, in the dark, which felt wrong. It was misshapen and lumpy, and there was a widespread belief that it caused leprosy or fevers. For roughly 2 centuries, most of Europe grew it as an oddity, or as animal feed, and would not eat it. And meanwhile, Europe kept starving. Grain harvests failed regularly. A bad summer could empty a region. Bread was the whole system, and the whole system rested on weather, which is why certain rulers became obsessed with the potato, because they could see what almost nobody else could. A field of potatoes produces far more calories than the same field of grain. Potatoes grow underground, so hail and storms cannot flatten them the way they flatten wheat. An army marching through a country can burn a wheat field in an afternoon. It cannot easily destroy a potato crop, because the food is beneath the soil. Frederick the Great of Prussia understood this completely. He issued orders to plant potatoes. The orders were ignored. He is said to have sent officials to instruct villagers directly, and there is a much-repeated story that in one town, the people looked at the potatoes and said they had no smell and no taste, and that even the dogs would not eat them. So, according to the famous story, he changed tactics. He planted a royal potato field and stationed guards around it, with instructions to guard it conspicuously but not too well. The message to every passing peasant was obvious: this must be valuable. And the potatoes began to disappear at night, exactly as intended. Historians treat that story with some caution, and it may well have grown in the telling, but it survives because it captures something true about him and about how the potato actually spread. It did not win people over with arguments. It won by being quietly slipped into ordinary life. In France, the campaign had a name and a face. Antoine Augustin Parmentier had been a prisoner of war in Prussia, where he was fed potatoes and discovered they did him no harm at all. He came home and spent years promoting them, staging elaborate dinners of potato dishes for fashionable guests, and reportedly presenting potato flowers to the king and queen so the court could be seen wearing them. He is also said to have used the guarded field trick himself, and here it worked. The potato spread across Europe through the 1700s and 1800s and quietly transformed the continent. The population grew. Historians and economists have argued for years about exactly how much of that growth to credit to the potato, and estimates vary, but there is broad agreement that it was substantial. More calories per acre meant more surviving children, in a Europe that had spent centuries balanced on the edge of hunger. So this looks like the happy ending. A misunderstood vegetable overcomes superstition, defeats famine, and feeds a continent. That is where the story usually stops. It should not stop there, because in solving one problem, Europe had quietly created a much worse one. Remember the Andes, thousands of varieties planted together deliberately. Europe did not import thousands of varieties. It imported a handful, and over time, farmers narrowed it further, selecting the ones that gave the biggest yield. Nowhere did this go further than Ireland. There, a huge portion of the rural population came to depend on the potato as the main food of daily life, and overwhelmingly on a single high-yielding variety. Understand what that means. Not a country that liked potatoes. A country where a very large number of people ate little else, grown from plants that were, genetically, nearly identical to one another. They were not farming a species, they were farming one plant, copied millions of times. In 1845, a water mold called Phytophthora infestans arrived in Europe. It destroys potatoes, the leaves blacken, the tubers rot in the ground, or turn to foul mush in storage after being lifted. And because the crop was so genetically uniform, there was no resistant variety standing in the next row to survive and carry people through. The blight returned across several years. The result was catastrophe. Roughly 1 million people died of starvation and disease, and around 1 million more emigrated, many in appalling conditions. Ireland's population fell by something in the order of a quarter and has still not returned to its pre-famine level. And this is the part that must be said clearly, because it is not a story about a plant disease alone. Ireland continued to export other food during those years, under a system of land ownership and political decisions that left the poorest with nothing to fall back on when the potato failed. The blight destroyed the crop. What turned a crop failure into a catastrophe of that scale was human. So that is the answer to what I asked at the start. The potato went from feared poison to force-marketed miracle because it produced more food per acre than anything else available, and rulers were desperate. And it went from miracle to catastrophe because Europe took a plant whose entire genius was its variety and stripped that variety away in pursuit of yield. The Andes had spent thousands of years learning to plant differences. Europe planted sameness, and sameness has no backup plan. We began with soldiers guarding a field to make thieves of the people watching. We climbed to the high Andes and found thousands of varieties planted side by side as insurance. We watched Europe refuse the plant for 200 years out of genuine fear. We saw a king trick his subjects and a Frenchman charm a court with flowers. We watched a continent grow on it, and we stood in the fields of 1845 as a mold turned a nation's only food to rot. And here is the quiet part, the part that is really about you. The lesson of the potato is not about potatoes. It is about the cost of optimization. Every variety the Andean farmers kept was, in a narrow sense, inefficient. Some produced less, some were harder to grow. A modern accountant would have removed them, and their inefficiency was precisely the thing that kept people alive, because it meant no single disaster could take everything at once. Europe made the rational choice, variety by variety, until the resilience was gone and nobody had decided to remove it. I think that pattern is everywhere, in how we work, how we build systems, how we arrange our own lives. We trim the spare capacity because it is not doing anything, and it is not doing anything precisely because it is spare. So if there is something in your life that seems slightly redundant, a skill you do not use, a friendship that is not useful, a small margin of time you cannot justify, be a little slow to cut it. The Andes were right. Plant more than one thing. Now tell me, which part surprised you the most? The guarded field, the 2 centuries Europe spent refusing to eat it, or the thousands of varieties still grown in the Andes? Tell me below. Next time, something built 2,000 years ago is still standing today and holds a record no modern engineer has broken. We know exactly what it is made of. We took samples, and for over 1,000 years we still could not reproduce it. Take care of yourself, my friend. This has been TokiCast, where the small things quietly change the world. I'll see you soon.